Am I on? Let me turn this up. All right. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, I pray you be with us today. I pray that you would give me the words to say, Lord, to effectively communicate your word to the people here. I pray that you would help us all to have open hearts and open minds to hear your word, even the hard things that are sometimes difficult to hear and live with, Lord. I pray that you would help us to just always seek the truth and always seek the right thing, the good and moral path, Lord. Help us to have a better, deeper understanding of the simple things in your word, Lord, and I pray that we would apply it to our hearts. I pray this in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so this is the sixth commandment, week 9, thou shalt not kill. We're now past the halfway point, and we're doing good. We're right on track. So this week we're talking about murder. So let's read the text of this command. This is Exodus 20:13. You can all turn there. And also turn to Numbers 35:31. So, in fact, just go to Numbers 35. Exodus 20 is pretty simple. So, Exodus 20, verse 13 says, thou shalt not kill. Very simple. Now, very quickly, let's go to Numbers 35, verse 31. Numbers 35:31. Moreover, ye shall take no satisfaction for the life of a murderer, which is guilty of death, but he shall be surely put to death. So this is interesting. In one verse we have, thou shalt not kill. And in the next verse we have, you must kill. So we're kind of told these contradictory commands. What do we do? The answer is clearly we need a better understanding of what this command means. It is not a blanket statement to never kill anyone, even though it does say, thou shalt not kill. So we're going to go through a better understanding of what this commandment is and what it covers. So what does it mean? What does it cover? So we're going to look at murder, manslaughter, suicide, and self-defense in this class. So we're going to get a little bit of a deep dive into each one of these. Obviously, that's a lot to cover. And then we're going to top it off with capital punishment. So this is an interesting part of the Ten Commandments. We looked at last week, we finished the first half, the first 5 commandments, which were generally relating our relationship of ourselves to God. And the last commandment was our relationship of ourselves to other people. And in this section, from commands 6 through 10, these are very much directly relating between us and other people and ourselves. And it's much less of our relationship between us and God. And so this shift in perspective comes with it prescribed punishments. So each one of these commands has some public outworking of these commandments and a prescribed punishment for each of these outworkings. And it's a very interesting shift how it works. And it's going to play itself out much more in the very end of the class. But for now, we're going to see that every one of these commands going forward has a punishment linked to it. And in this case, we're going to look at capital punishment, which is the specific violation of this commandment of thou shalt not kill carries this punishment. And we're going to see exactly how that goes into. So it's going to be a pretty broad look at all these things. We're going to try to get in depth somewhat, but there's always more to say, and we don't have a lot of time to go through all of it. So before we jump in, let's look at this question that I gave you last week. Can a person be saved and still commit suicide? So this was a very interesting question, and I really do want to hear what you think. So who's willing to raise their hand and say, yes, I believe a person can be saved and commit suicide? If you've taken my class, you don't count. Can a person be saved and commit suicide? Who thinks no, suicide is a mortal sin? Okay. Who thinks, letter C, no, if someone commits suicide, it is proof that they were never saved? Who thinks that's the answer? Okay. And what about D? No, a saved person can't commit suicide, but for other reasons that I just didn't cover. Okay. Some of you never raised your hand, so that's fine. So that's good. I saw actually a somewhat broad answer. So that's very good. So let's dive right into it. So let's look at the first few aspects of this command: murder, manslaughter, and suicide. So what do we mean by murder? The intentional act of killing an innocent human being. So this is the main thrust of this command, obviously. It's thou shalt not kill. Very clearly it means don't kill. it's by far the most common understanding of this command. Even the secular lost world will understand that thou shalt not kill means thou shalt not murder. Very few people take the hardline response that thou shalt not kill means there are no circumstances, even in war or self-defense, that you can't kill someone. We all understand it means murder, although we are going to cover those other questions a little bit. So murder has these three parts to it: the intentional act of killing and an innocent human being. So let's go through each one of these aspects. So intentionality. So let's turn to Numbers 35, and this is where most of our text is going to be today. So Numbers 35, let's read verses 16 through 21. So why do I say murder has to be intentional? So Numbers 35, 16 to 21. And if he smite him with an instrument of iron so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. And if he smite him with throwing a stone wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he smite him with an hand weapon of wood, whereof he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer when he meeteth him. He shall slay him. But if he thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by laying of weight, that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hand, that he die, he that smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. The revenger of blood shall slay the murderer when he meeteth him. Okay, so here we see that this is how God intended Israel to punish murder and how Israel should view murder. And it gives a good framework of what we're talking about here. So here God is covering all the bases. He talks about weapons or tools, how you kill someone. And the basic idea of that is it doesn't matter how you kill someone, even if you go about somewhat roundabout ways to do it. If you use a weapon, or if you throw a stone, or if you punch him, it doesn't matter how you kill him. If you kill him is the important part. The important part here is that the murderer has hate towards his enemy. So intentionality, you must have a reason to kill him. You must be intentionally doing these things. You don't accidentally kill someone with a weapon of wood. If you are taking that up and you're killing someone with a weapon, you're intentionally killing them. That's the important part of here. It talks about lying in wait for his victim. Obviously, this means it's premeditated. You are intentionally seeking to end the life of another person. This is encapsulated in murder. This is a core component of murder. This means there was premeditation and motive for killing the innocent person, and that's required for murder. Innocence is also required for there to be murder. So we'll see later that killing someone can be justified if they deserved it. But for now, we should understand that the victim of a killing must be innocent for it to be considered murder. So we are going to talk about some cases later where someone does deserve to be killed and they should be killed, like in self-defense. But for now, when we're talking about murder, innocence of the victim is required. So where do we see that the victim is innocent here in the Bible? It's not stated explicitly, and I think that's an important point, actually. God doesn't have to specifically state that the victims are innocent, because the point of innocent is that you are innocent until proven guilty. We are all by default innocent, and that's the case. So it doesn't matter if he's lying in wait to kill someone because he hated them for X, Y, or Z reason. The reason is never given. The motives per se are never given. It's never in question what did the victim do to deserve the murder. It's just the idea is that he lied in wait to kill someone, and that person is assumed innocent. So innocence of the victim is assumed, and it's required for it to be murder. We are innocent by default and need to perform some form of evil act to lose that innocence, to require our death. Legality is another thing that's not part of murder. You have a question?
The revenger of blood isn't killed, so he's going after a guy who isn't.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that. So that comes under capital punishment. Yep. So legality. So notice that the legal status of the killing has no bearing on its morality. God here does not say that you can kill someone as long as your laws specify you can kill someone here. No, the law is supposed to be determined by morality and not the other way around. We're going to see this in the last few, I have hopefully three weeks of classes to talk about biblical government, and this is going to be a core component of it. The law should follow morality and not the other way around. Just because when the Israelites were sacrificing their children to Moloch, it was theoretically anyway, perfectly legal to do it, but it didn't make it fine. It didn't make it good for them to do the things, even though there was no punishment here on earth for them. There was no crime against sacrificing your children to Moloch, like abortion. Just because it's legal does not make it moral. It still is murder. It still falls under all the same categories. You are intentionally taking the life of an innocent child, and so it is murder. For an example of this, we can look at Cain, who was the first murderer in history, and he serves as a good example to illustrate these points. So let me read Genesis 4. This is the first murder. Genesis 4, verses 5 through 15. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect, he being God had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth out to me from the ground. And now thou art cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So here we see that Abel was innocent, obviously. Cain was very angry and intentionally killed Abel. So it fits all the categories for murder. And also there was no legal system at all to inform his decision. So by default, his actions were legal. There was literally no law, no crime. This was not a crime. When Cain killed Abel, there was no crime in existence. But yet, it was still murder. It was still wrong. It was still a sin. And God still had a punishment for Cain. So God cursed him even though he spared him from execution, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. God shows him quite a bit of mercy, and that's good for Cain, but we'll see later that it didn't play out too well. All right, so that's murder, the act of intentionally killing an innocent human being, regardless of its legal status. So let's look on to manslaughter. Any questions on murder? It's pretty straightforward. I think we all have a very good understanding of murder. That's not going to be the real focus of this class since it's so basic and so easily understood. So let's move on to manslaughter. So this is the accidental killing with no hatred, motive, or forethought. So this comes from Deuteronomy 19. So Deuteronomy 19, verses 4 through 6 says, And this is the case of the slayer, which shall flee thither, that he may live. Whoso killeth his neighbor ignorantly, whom he hated not in his past. And when a man goeth into the wood with his neighbor to hew wood, and his hand fetcheth a stone, fetcheth a stroke with the axe to cut down the tree, and the head slippeth from the helve, and lighteth upon his neighbor that he die, he shall flee into one of those cities and live, lest the avenger of the blood pursue the slayer while his heart is hot, and overtake him because the way is long, and slay him, whereas he was not worthy of death, inasmuch as he hated him not in time past. So the idea here is that you are doing something normal. You are doing something that would not normally entail death. You are cutting wood. and the axe head falls off the haft that you're holding, and it kills someone totally by accident. You did not want to kill the person. You had no hatred in your heart towards them. He was your friend, in fact, your neighbor, I guess it says. And you're just doing something that accidentally, by no fault of your own, ends up killing someone. Verse 6 specifically says that the killer, in this case, is not worthy of death for this. And it carves out cities of refuge where that person now has to flee to because the revenger of blood, it might kill him otherwise. If we read Numbers 35, if we read Numbers 35, verse 12, you don't have to turn there, I'll read it to you. It says, "And they shall be unto you cities for refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer die not, until he stand before the congregation in judgment." So the idea is, if you accidentally kill someone, you flee to these cities of refuge before you stand trial. Because in the Old Testament system, it wasn't just that everyone stood trial before an execution. There was someone called the Avenger of Blood, who was a near kin to the person who died. It was his job to revenge the blood, to execute the person who did the killing. So in this case, the idea is, before you can determine whether or not it was murder or manslaughter, the slayer would go to these cities of refuge to protect him until there was a court case, until there was adjudication to figure out, did this person intentionally kill him and it looks like an accident, or what? They have to determine, was it murder or was it manslaughter? So there's obviously two separate categories here, and the difference is one is intentional and one is not. The punishment in some cases is life in exile within the city until there's some rules. Every so many years, everyone is freed from those cities. When the high priest dies, all those people are freed from that city because the high priest was a picture of Christ, and when Christ has died, your sins are forgiven. So in that case, you would flee to those cities until there's a court case to determine your guilt or innocence, or until one of these other situations occur. But the main idea here is that unintentional killing is not murder. It is not a sin, in fact, and you are not worthy of death. However, there are still consequences for those actions, and those are not good consequences. God very much values our life, and even the unintentional killing, even the unintentional taking of a life has consequences, and they're not comfortable, they're not good, just simply because God values our life. So let's look at the last part here. Manslaughter, unintentional killing, punished by imprisonment. I guess an equivalent today would be imprisonment of some kind. So let's look at the last part here, suicide. Now this is an interesting one. This is the intentional killing of one's self. And just like this deer, I'm sure it definitely hung itself, just like Jeffrey Epstein. So this is morally equivalent to murder, since it has all the same points. An innocent life, yours in this case, was intentionally taken by someone, by you in this case. So it's the mere fact that you are taking your own life does not change the fact that you are taking a life that was not supposed to be taken. Obviously, this doesn't have the same punishment as murder because you're already dead, but it is the same sin. It falls in the same category. You are intentionally taking the life of an innocent person. When you commit suicide, you are in fact murdering yourself. I will say that there is significant debate within Christianity if someone can be saved and kill themselves. That's the reason why I asked the question in the first place. Or if someone who did commit suicide was ever truly saved. There's a lot of questions and I saw a lot of responses were varied. Maybe if you kill yourself, it's proof that you were never saved in the first place. I've heard that a lot. If you kill yourself, the Catholics have a category of sins where it's mortal sins, and if you do them, I'm not quite sure if you can never be saved or you were never saved in the first place. You can never be saved from it. You go to hell. You go right to hell. Don't pass go, just go straight to hell. So mortal sin, it's a Catholic leftover. So what are my thoughts to it? And I think these are biblical. I think all sin leaves a mark on your life, that someone whose life is defined by sin is almost certainly not saved. This comes from Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20, which is a long passage, but the key part of it is by your fruits we will know you. Essentially, by the actions and the fruits of your Christian life, we will know if you are a Christian. However, I don't think there is anything special about murder or suicide or any other sin, for that matter, that would prove that someone is not saved by the mere fact that they committed that one sin. I think some sins are more egregious than others by our standards, but categorically speaking, all sins condemn you. So the commission of one sin is not particularly damning. So let's look at some examples of suicide in the Bible and see what they tell us. So Saul is one example. If you read 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 6, we would read about Saul's suicide. He is being pursued by the Philistines. The Philistines rout his army. God has already promised him that he and his sons would die, and so Saul is in total despair. He doesn't want to be abused and tortured, presumably by the Philistines, so he kills himself. I don't like using Saul as this example to prove that you can be saved and commit suicide, because there's a lot of debate in Christianity of whether or not Saul was saved. I believe he was, but that's there's so much debate that I'm just going to skip that one entirely. I'm going to go to Samson, actually. So Samson is someone who is described as a servant of God. God moved him. He was a judge over Israel. God's Spirit was with him, and he was a judge. So by all accounts, I think it is safe to say that Samson was a saved man. If we go to Judges 16, 28 through 30, we will read about his death. So it says this, Judges 16, 28 through 30. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the whole house stood, and on which it was borne up, one of the one with his right hand, and of the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew with his death were more than they which he slew in his life. So clearly, Samson intentionally took his own life, and he didn't deserve to die. He had not committed any sins that were capital sins, so he was intentionally taking the life of an innocent person. That this is suicide. And yet he gets an honorable mention in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11:32, further proof that he was a saved man. So I think this is pretty clear. Not only did he commit suicide, but God aided it, which is a strange thought. It was a last attack on all the Philistines that were there, Israel's enemies, who who Samson was supposed to kill and to judge. It was still, I guess you could argue, it was an act of war still. So God enables it, and Samson kills himself. He's mentioned in the Hall of Faith, and he was used by God in all these ways, and God's Spirit was on him. This was a saved man killing himself. So to answer last week's question, I think it is yes, you can commit suicide and be a saved man. However, generally, it's a sin. This probably gets away with it because it was in a wartime. So it was a last stand, if you will. All right, so let's go on to self-defense. This is the next command, aspect of this command. So now, yeah.
Does that mean that if it's a sin, you cannot do it anymore? That it has a different outcome?
No, the point is that you can still sin and be saved, right. Even suicide. Even sins that we would view as terrible, awful sins. You could still be a murderer and be saved. Suicide is murder. It fits in the same category, and I think Samson is a proof that he was saved and he committed suicide. I think Saul also fits in the same category, but Saul has other issues where people can argue that he's not saved. I think Saul was saved, but that's it requires a whole nother argument that I don't have time to go through. So Samson is the proof text I wanted to use for that one. Self-defense. So let's look briefly at this aspect. So what is self-defense? The definition would be protecting the life and safety of yourself or others with lethal force. So this comes into the category of innocence now. So we've established that killing an innocent person is forbidden, but we should ask ourselves, can we kill someone who's not innocent? And this is, at least one of these categories is the key here. So definition: to protect your life, safety, or to protect the life or safety of yourself or others with lethal force. So this is just my definition for the class. This is not a legal definition. Don't take this to court. You'll definitely lose the court case if you use this definition. But the idea is, thou shalt not kill also means you shouldn't let others kill. It's a sin for you, it's a sin for them. So if we look at Exodus 22, let's turn there. This is the quintessential text for self-defense, I think. Exodus 22, verses 2 through 4. Let's read that. If a thief be found breaking up, and he be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. If the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. So here we're reading about some rules for defending your home from a thief in this case. So there are two cases here. One, the thief breaks in the night, and one in the day. And there are two responses to the thief in this case. If he breaks up in the night, if he breaks in, I should say, in the night to steal your stuff, you are allowed to kill him. And if you do kill him, no blood will be shed for his death, which is stark contrast to the opposite side, which is if you kill him in the day, you shall pay for his killing. If you want to read interesting things, you can read about how the American system, our founding fathers would talk about this chapter and these verses at length to determine what should our rules for self-defense be here in America. And they reference this section quite a bit. And so in America, we see good laws where if someone breaks in at night and you kill them, there's a whole set of different laws for that. Versus if someone breaks in the daytime, you have different responses to that. So it's a good thing that we have that this verse plays out in our laws, and that's a very good thing. And we have our Christian, you would say, Christian nationalist founding fathers to thank for that. So Matthew 24:43 through 44. Compares being a good Christian to being a good and watchful homeowner who will not allow a thief to break into his house, which reiterates Exodus 22, and it gives let me read that to you. So Matthew 24:43 through 44 says, "But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched, and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh." So it's a parable saying, just like any good homeowner would defend his house from being broken into, which is the text in Exodus, you should also be watching and waiting for the Son of Man to come again and be ready for him. Obviously, you don't, attack him, but be ready is the idea, because you don't know when a thief is going to come to your house, and you don't know when Christ is going to come back. So the idea in Exodus 22 is that it is a good thing to defend your house. If you combine Exodus 22 with Matthew 24, the idea is it is good to defend your house, it is good to defend your person, and even if that means you end up killing someone in your defense, that is allowed. Now, if you do it in the daytime, if there are ways to avoid killing someone, that's the idea, then you should do that, but you should still defend your house. All these laws about you have the duty to retreat and you have to, basically run away as soon as someone threatens your house with anything, that's anti-biblical. You don't necessarily have the option to kill them for just taking $2 from your sock drawer, but if they're breaking in at night, you don't know what they're there for. So you are automatically allowed to kill them, even if they were there to steal $2 from your sock drawer. If they break in broad daylight, it's different. But at least in some cases, self-defense is perfectly allowed, and Exodus 22 is a good proof text for that. So this is clearly not a call, the command, I should say, thou shalt not kill, is clearly not a call to pacifism. It should not be taken to mean that you should not defend yourself, even if that means with lethal force. Exodus 22 proves that very nicely. In the New Testament, we see that when Jesus was preparing his disciples for his inevitable departure, Luke 22, verses 36 through 28, tells us this. Then said he unto them, But now that he hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say unto you that this is that which is written must be yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, there are 2 swords. And he said unto them, it is enough. So in modern terms, that would be Jesus saying, stay strapped or get clapped. In millennial speak. Some of you don't get that. But the idea is, Jesus is here in the Last Supper. He's with his friends in a perfectly safe place with 12 disciples. And he says, if you don't have a sword, go sell your clothes and buy one. Then 2 of the disciples say, hey, look, I have a sword. And he said, that's good. That's enough, at least. So it's interesting that essentially the apostles were concealed carrying, if you would, all the time with Jesus. And Jesus said this is a good thing. And why? Because Jesus is not a pacifist. He says, arm yourself, be prepared, defend your home. All these good things that good Christians and good people in general should do. The disciples were constantly armed, and Jesus approved, even at the Last Supper. So if you see people carrying in the church here, that's good. All right, now quickly let's move on to the last part, and this is the question from last week. Is capital punishment the correct punishment for premeditated murder today? So we read some verses to it, but does that really apply to us, or was that just for Israel? So I want to know what you think. So who thinks, yes, capital punishment is the correct punishment for today? Okay. Who thinks, no, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind? So the idea is that revenge is not the right way to look at things. Who thinks that? Okay. Who thinks, C, there is always a chance for repentance, even for murderers? Who thinks that's the right answer? Okay. Who thinks D? No, because sometimes people are wrongly convicted. So sometimes people are wrongly convicted for murder, and when they're executed, that's not good. Or who thinks, no, but for other reasons? Okay, so let's look into this. So capital punishment, this is the last aspect of this command. So what's the kind of the definition? To put someone to death for a specific crime, and in this case, it's murder. So it's not generally, it's the more broad idea is for any certain other crimes, you could also have capital punishment, but just for this one, it's just for murder. So it is to be carried out by people. So this is an interesting point. This comes from Genesis 9:6. Capital punishment is biblical. The question is, does it apply to us today? Well, Genesis 9:6 is where the idea of capital punishment gets its first start. It is the earliest command, or one of the earliest commands recorded, and it's given right after the flood. So Genesis 9:6 says, whoso sheddeth a man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. So this is important because we often get squeamish with our modern sensibilities, and even many Christians tend to shrink back from the required punishment for murder and other certain crimes. We need to be very clear as Christians, the death penalty is not cruel. It is both just and moral, and it is also not only a command given to the Old Testament nation of Israel. It was first given here in Genesis 9:6 when no nation of Israel existed, when Abraham was not born, when the Jews did not exist, when not even just the very beginning, the restart of the whole world, God gives this command: anyone who kills anyone, you must punish that person, and you must punish them by execution. So this is not a command to the Jews. This is not a command to a specific people in a specific land. This is a command to the whole world, everyone, everywhere, which fits nicely with the 10 Commandments. All the commands are moral codes for everyone, everywhere. You have a quick question?
Weren't there people that were stoned, like for adultery?
We'll get that later, next week, in fact. So if you, this command in Genesis 9:6 applies to us today. So if you read the conversation between Cain and God in Genesis 4:13 through 14, which we read earlier, Cain was worried that he would be killed for his crime. Let me read that to you. And Cain said unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. So Cain had this instinct. This is even before the command in Genesis 9:6, when there's only him and his parents and his siblings in existence. Cain had this instinct that someone's going to kill him, someone's going to punish him for the evil crime that he committed against Abel. And God spares Cain from this, but it was clear to Cain that the natural and just outcome for murder was execution. So even before the command in Genesis 9:6, this was understood. So the real question is, why do we understand differently today? Also in Genesis 9:6, it teaches us that the reason for such a strict and harsh command is that we are made in God's image, and therefore we're special and unique throughout all of creation, which, as a side note, says that we can kill animals because they are not made in the image of God. So here's the idea. If a fish commits a crime, it's perfectly fine to kill the fish for that. Also, these are fish doing the correct thing, feeding people and carrying out capital punishment. So another point, and I think this is probably the most important point, capital punishment is not optional, and there are no alternatives to capital punishment. Numbers 35, verses 30 through 34 tells us this: "Whoso killeth any person, the murderer shall be put to death by the mouth of witnesses. But one witness shall not testify against any person to cause him to die. Moreover, ye shall take no satisfaction for the life of a murderer, which is guilty of death. But he shall be surely put to death, and ye shall take no satisfaction for him that is fled to the city of his refuge, that he should come again to dwell in the land until the death of the priest. So ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are. For blood it defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. Defile not therefore the land which ye shall inhabit, wherein I dwell. For I the Lord dwell among the children of Israel." So this very clearly says that it is unjust to let a murderer live. It is unjust to have life imprisonment. And this is a big problem that we are seeing in America today, or in most of the world today. The only biblical prescribed punishment for murder is the death penalty, and we should not back away from that command. Manslaughter is punished differently, we saw. They have exile in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But outside of that, murder must be punished with capital punishment. It's interesting to note, though, when God spared Cain from execution, his mercy was used as license to sin by Lamech, who in Genesis 4:23 through 24 said, "And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold." So at least part of the death penalty is to deter the crime. We generally understand that. You have to really do some mental gymnastics to deny that. But obviously, capital punishment is a deterrence to murder. But that's not its only reason. The real reason is to remove the, what does it say in Numbers 35? To remove the blood guiltiness, essentially. The blood defileth the land, and cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him who shed it. So it's an interesting idea. It sounds very Old Testament, and we kind of leave it there. But the idea is your murder pollutes not just yourself, but the land you live in. In this case, it was written to Israel, but since the punishment starts before Israel, it's just reinforcing the idea. It's adding on to the idea. A crime here in Nashua of murder pollutes Nashua, not just the person who did it. It's a pollution to the whole land, the whole city, the whole nation. And the only way to remove that pollutant is by capital punishment. So this is pretty awful. It is unjust to let the murderer live, and we bear some guilt for not executing them. Numbers 35 that we read mentions that the land is defiled by the murder of the innocent, and it's only cleansed by the death penalty. This is echoed in Deuteronomy 19:10, which says, "That innocent blood be not shed in thy land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and so blood be upon thee." And in Genesis 4:10, it says, "And he, God, said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth." Psalms 106, 37 through 38 says, "Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood." So this is an interesting set of passages. Murder pollutes the land where you're in, not just you. It is not a private crime. It is a thing that defiles, when God says in Deuteronomy 19:10, "So blood be upon thee," not just the murderer. We share some guilt in murder if we don't punish it. And that's pretty terrifying if you think about it, especially considering how many abortions there are in America, the killing of innocent children. What do we do in response to that? Nothing. It's legal in most places in America, and no one is punished for it. That should terrify you. It terrifies me. Of the 60 or so million children who were killed, nobody's been punished for it. That's somewhat terrifying. What would be the appropriate punishment? This is going to be hard to hear, but the doctors who perform abortions are murderers. The people who facilitate the abortion are murderers. The nurses who assist it are murderers. And the mothers who bring their children in are murderers. That's rough. That's hard to hear, but it's exactly true. And the only way to remove our guilt for those murders is capital punishment. So what does that mean? I don't know if this is going to make it YouTube, but the mothers of aborted children should be punished with capital punishment. That's hard to hear. That needs to be the law. That was the law for Israel. And there is no command saying otherwise. There is no modification of that in the New Testament. That's pretty tough. That's pretty rough. This is how far we've strayed from the simple, basic moral facts found in the Bible. That even saying that murderers should be put to death is makes some people gasp. Actually, I think a lot of you are gasping in agreement, but it's rough to say. It's rough to hear, but it's exactly true. And we bear some guilt for not punishing those people. All right, so let's look at what about accidental convictions? So this is often brought up, and I think this is there's legitimacy to this argument. So the argument made here is that we shouldn't have capital punishment because what if you're wrong? And that's a very good instinct. What if you punish the wrong person? Someone, DNA evidence 30 years later exonerates this person, and now they're free to go, and they weren't really the murderer. First of all, that doesn't actually happen. That's very rare that it does happen. But it generally never mind, I don't have time for DNA evidence. But this is not a good argument because this argument applies to all punishments. All punishments are irreversible. If you lock someone up for 4 minutes, they'll never get that 4 minutes back. You can never give them 4 minutes. All punishments are irreversible. I guess you could argue financial punishments, maybe not. You could compensate them in some way, but at best you're making an attempt. You'll never really get there. To address this question, though, the Bible gives an outline for the justice system that has safeguards and rules to help prevent wrongful convictions. So you can read Numbers 35:30, which talks about you have to have multiple witnesses, they have to agree, so forth and so on. If you read Deuteronomy 19:15 through 21, we hear that there are appeals courts, careful examinations, strict penalties for false accusations, and so on. The idea is your court system is required to be able to weed out those false convictions. Now, it doesn't always happen, but that does not change the fact that the punishment still stands. If you are found guilty of murder, you have appeals, you have the courts to go through, and if those don't find you innocent, you should be executed. There are also rules against bribery and favoritism that further reinforce the idea that our courts are supposed to handle all these issues. So these safeguards do not prevent all wrongful convictions, but they do make us as a society innocent of them, since these judgments would be made justly and in good faith. God knew that sometimes an innocent person would be wrongfully convicted, And therefore, he gave us guardrails and precautions to help prevent this. But ultimately, he is the one who requires us to carry out the death penalty, even with our inherently flawed judgment. So the idea is that the death penalty is a human institution that humans carry out to carry out God's punishment for sin. If God wanted to, he could simply strike down every murderer the moment they murder someone, because he knows their heart. He knows exactly what happened. He doesn't need a court system. He was literally there when it happened. He knew their heart, their intentions. He knew all of it. And he could choose to just strike everyone dead the moment they murder someone, but he doesn't. He says, this is for you to do. And since I know you're not perfect, you may not get it right every time, but here are rules that you must follow so that when you do convict someone, you have good faith that you did the right thing. And you are now free of the guilt of their death when they are executed. So, no, capital punishment has not been done away with. Capital punishment was instituted before Israel. It's instituted after Israel. And the rules that were given to Israel apply to us today, and any good society would follow it. So very briefly, what does this law teach us? So what does it teach about God? God is our judge, and also God requires us to judge and punish sin ourselves. So he's delegating his responsibility of judgment to us, and we are supposed to do that. What does it teach about us? Our lives are valuable because we are made in God's image, therefore don't kill. We should protect life, not just avoid taking it. We must punish sin. We are commanded by God to judge and punish this sin in particular. You go ahead and pass out those things, yep. What does it teach about good and evil? Evil has severe consequences, and evil must be punished by us in some cases. And then evil affects a nation. It pollutes the whole land. How do we apply it, and what are its outcomes? So the right to life and self-defense comes from this command. We have no time to develop it, but it's very interesting to see where early America gets the idea of the right to life. It's from this. What else do we get? A safe society and a good justice system if you follow these laws, and respect for human life. How do we do it? Don't murder, obviously. Be careful and safe to avoid manslaughter, and protect life whenever you can, and enact capital punishment nationally to avoid polluting yourself from those sins. So now we're getting a handout. Here's the question for next week. Which one more closely represents the proper response to sexual immorality? Pride Month in the Middle East, where you get stoned, or Jesus just tolerates it? He's cool with it as long as you I don't know. Is Jesus cool with it, or should we be more like the barbarians in the Middle East who stone the gays? So that's your question for next week. Next week is thou shalt not commit adultery, so just kind of a warning to all of you. If you want to have kids in here, it's definitely PG-13. There's nothing explicit that you wouldn't find written in the Bible, but just be warned if you don't want your kids to see it or hear it. So that's it. You're dismissed.